Your Bibles this morning to Ephesians chapter 5. We're going to be looking at verses 14 to 17. I think everybody at this time of the year thinks more about time than they probably do any other time of the year. And they tend to look at the past year as things that should have maybe been different, and they face the new year with some resolutions. And the older you get, the more time seems to change in its effect on you. In 18 days, I will be 77. And it's amazing to me how quickly life has played itself out. Now, it's hard for children and youth to really understand that because they count long days for future privileges and freedoms. The children can't wait till they're 4 years old. They can go to Sunday school. And that just seems like a long time. And then you're in your early teens, and maybe you get the privilege to sit with your peers in church. Now, that's something you look forward to, and it seems like that's never going to happen. And certainly, 16 is a year that will never come, especially for young men. And then maybe you look forward to having enough money to buy your own car. And in your late teens, you look forward to the possibilities of courtship and marriage, of all things. And I mean, when it gets down to the last part of the marriage wait, I mean, you count days, you count minutes, it's really a long time till that happens. And then you look forward perhaps to buying a house, and then maybe you look forward to the age of 65 and you retire. But it seems as when we pass those milestones, time seems to pick up speed. Somebody has said it this way: when I was a child, I laughed and wept. Time crept. When I was a youth, I dreamed and talked. Time walked. When I became a full-grown man, time ran. When older still I daily grew, time flew. Soon I shall be traveling on, time gone. You know, there's certain things that do speed up time. If you know you're going to die in the next 2 or 3 weeks, that time flies. You just don't have enough time to do everything. It's anticipation that slows time down. And that's why the youth have trouble understanding how fast time flies, because they are anticipating all these milestones, and everything just seems to move so slowly toward these freedoms and privileges they are looking forward to. And many wake up too late to find that they have been sleepwalking. The story is told of a girl who went to college, and she hated college, but she thought, if I ever get out of college, I'll get married and have children, and then I'll be able to finally enjoy life. So she stuck to her classes, and she got through college, and then she got married, and she had children, and that was a lot of work, but she thought, if I could ever get these children raised, then I'll be able to relax and enjoy life. But then her husband said, we want to send these children to college, and we're not going to have enough money. You've got to go to work. Oh my, she hated it, but she went to work. She thought, well, if we ever get these children through college, then I'll be able to really enjoy life. Finally, the last child graduated from college, and the bills were all paid, and she went to her employer and said, I quit. Well, he said, don't quit now. If you work 8 more years, you will have a wonderful pension from this company. So she hated the job, but she just couldn't resist that extra money that she was going to have when she finally could retire and enjoy life. So the 8 years finally was up, and she and her husband both retired at the same time. They sold their house. They bought themselves a little cottage. And then they sat down on the swing on their front porch and looked at the family pictures and dreamed of all the good old days. Like I said, if we're not careful, somebody has said life is what happens while you're thinking of something else to do. And so people get through life, and they finally wake up and they find out that life is not yielding what it should have yielded, because they were not facing it the way they should have been. They were presuming on the time they had. I always remember one of Shakespeare's characters, it was Macbeth. This is what he said when his wife finally tragically died. bitterly, he said, life is but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a story told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Now, unless we wake up and take control of the narrative, as God commands us to do, we will not come to the end of life with the kind of satisfaction and delight that God intends for us to have. God commands us this way: the hour is come for you to wake up from your slumber, because our salvation is nearer now than when we first believed. The night is nearly over, the day is almost here, so let us put aside the deeds of the darkness and put on the armor of light. And so the title of my message this morning is, Now is the Time. And here is the outline. 4 points. Time. You'll see these in the verses. To be awake. And that is verse 14. Time to be alert. And that's in verse 15. Time to be active. And that's in verse 16. And time to be astute. Well, that might be a big word for you. We'll define it when we get there. All right. That's what we want to look at this morning. So, time to be aware. Someone has said, and I've already said this, I didn't get it quoted quite right, life is what happens while you're making plans to do something else. It's like spending money. If you budget the money, you can do certain things that are really important in life. But if you just spend it as it comes, pay no attention to any kind of priorities with the money, and many people do that. I can name you somebody who has made lots of money, but they've never been able to buy a house. But if you watch their life, it just, whatever little thing they had in mind, cars, trinkets, whatever, it just got spent. So they never were able to do what most people would consider to be pretty important, is to have a roof over their head that they own. But see, they just paid no attention to how they handled their money. And so time is the same way. Unless you really pay attention to what you're doing, you'll just waste it. And then you'll get to the end and you'll realize, oh, there were certain priorities that I had hoped I wish now I had done, but they didn't get done because you didn't prioritize them. And time was not inexhaustible, it was limited. That's why the Bible says, buy up the time. Capture it, get a hold of it, make something out of it. And we'll get to that later. So unless you deny self and prioritize, whether it's money or whether it's life, the important things of life will never get done, or the things that are really important won't get done. It's like William Law said, and you've heard me say it, you are what you intend to be. It's all about intention. It's all about what you purpose or don't purpose that is going to make the difference. To be exact, you in this coming year have 8,760 hours. Now you can decide how you want to budget those. People who are wise with their money, they budget so much for this, so much for this, and so much for this. You have 8,760 hours to budget for this year. What do you want to see when you're my age and you look back over your life? Do you want to see a close-knit, godly family? That won't just happen. As I've said many times here, the only thing that happens automatically is sin. If you want a close-knit, godly family, you're going to have to prioritize the things you need to do and budget time to do those things. Do you want an inspiring understanding of Scripture? That won't just happen. You're going to have to make sure that time is spent doing that. Do you want look back on some significant contributions you made to the kingdom of God? That won't just happen. You will have to think what those contributions are going to be. Maybe it's in the area of writing. Maybe it's in the area of music. Maybe it's in the area, who knows? But none of those things will get it. I'll give you an example. I'm wishing, and I think I'll probably wish the day I die, that I had written a book on the kingdom of God. There's some things I want to say that have not been said in print that I'd like to leave as a legacy for people to be inspired by in the future. But I have not budgeted the time to do it, or the discipline. So that's not, unless something happens quickly, that's not going to happen. Do you want footprints of your faith to mold future generations? Would you like to be able to look back on your life and say, there's something I stood for that has put the kingdom of God in good stead? Would you like to have that? Perhaps it is articles, perhaps it's songs, perhaps it's books, perhaps it's poems. Name it. Would you like to leave some artifacts that really, really bless the coming generation? Well, I think of the Apostle Paul. We never heard him preach, and we'd not know one word he ever said if he had not written it down. That's really something to think about. But because Paul wrote it down, here's an enduring contribution to the kingdom of God. But it took time. In fact, God made sure he had time. He put him in prison, so he had lots of time to write. So I'm just giving an example. Here's a person who gave us something. Now, I know it's the inspired word of God, and God had his hand in making sure it happened. But it's a good example of what happens whenever we leave a tangible piece of something for the future generation to go back to over and over again. But that won't happen unless you purposefully, deliberately take the time to do it. Lives of great men, the poet tells us, all remind us we can make our lives sublime, and departing leave behind us footprints on the sands of time. But for this to happen, he goes on saying this, let us then be up and doing, with a heart for any fate, still achieving, still pursuing, learn to labor and to wait. Now, Christ gives light to those who wake up to live life, who set goals for Bible reading, for Bible memorization, for witnessing, for praying, for church attendance, for study, for family time. God gives light to those people who wake up to those things. Now, maybe you say, I just am not a very disciplined person. Well, will you seek help? I have been mentoring a young man at Sattler College. He's a young married man by the name of Sam Baer. He's actually Mervyn Baer's grandson. And he told me right at the beginning of our time that we spend together on a Zoom call, he said, the reason I went to Sattler is because I did not have enough discipline, the discipline and structure that I knew I needed, and I wasn't getting it myself. So I went to Sattler's because I knew they would make me do it. And he told me the rigorous schedule they give him. He says, I'm learning to schedule my life. I'm learning to put first things first. I'm learning to order my life to accomplish the things that I think are important. Structured education is very helpful. I owe a tremendous debt to the many papers I had to write and the many talks I had to organize and the many things I had to do in college. Not everybody goes to college. Paul had a tutor. I think Paul was well trained in organizing his thoughts and calling together information and putting it down. He had Gamaliel as a teacher. Or maybe you want to teach school. It's amazing to me how many men end up as school teachers, and then after that, they become extremely skilled in articulating things and organizing things. Melvin Lehman is a good example of that. The years he spent teaching school has really made him a clear thinker, able to clearly express himself because he submitted himself to the discipline of being a teacher. I'm just saying, if you can't get it together on your own, there are some things you can do. Maybe you're called to give a devotional. It was very obvious that Brother Cedric had given a lot of thought to the devotional, and he had his thoughts ordered well, and he presented them well. That didn't just happen. So when you have an opportunity like that, you've been given a responsibility that can force you, if you will, to sit down and organize and learn these disciplines. It'd be interesting to have you guess how long it took me to do this outline. Well, I timed myself this morning. It took me about an hour and a half just to do the outline. I didn't have anything else on my paper at that point. It was just the outline. That's all I was working on, was the outline. Because you see, the outline forced me to see the flow of thought. It forced my thoughts into categories. It helped me to think clearly what I was going to say and how it was going to develop. I think a lot of people don't realize that the time put into something like that is extremely important. That kind of structure, that kind of working to clarify your thinking, to be able to think how you're going to say things. So I'm just saying, we're all put in situations where we are put under a little bit of pressure to get this job, to get ourselves organized. Don't waste those. Don't just say, well, I'll just get up and read a psalm, and then I'll just go down and I'll paraphrase the verses, and then we'll have prayer. Don't do that. Take the opportunity to look at that psalm and see how it divides itself, and give the congregation some things to get a hold of so they understand that psalm better than what they would have otherwise. So, it's time to be awake. I didn't read the scripture. Here it is. Verse 14. Wherefore he saith, awake thou that sleepest. Just don't go sleepwalking through life. And arise from the dead, and Christ will give you light. I like that last statement. If we wake up and start to apply ourselves, light will come. And that has been my experience. Okay. 15. See then that you walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the times, because the days are evil. Circumspect. Well, you see circum there. It means around, okay? And spect means to see or to examine. Look all around. Be careful. Make a thorough examination of all the circumstances and all the possible consequences. Think deeply, think broadly, think specifically about what you're seeing, and analyze it carefully, like a bird. You know, a bird, you see how a bird's eyes just darts. It's looking all around, front, behind, and sides all the time. And it's very hard to catch a bird for that reason. But a lot of people are like the frog, the proverbial frog, who is put in water, and then they heat the water, and the frog boils before he jumps out, if they're not careful. Be alert. The education of our children. I thought of some illustrations this morning. You know, the first Mennonites had their own schools. Did you know that? The first Mennonites had their own schools. In fact, they built a building often for a school before they built a church. To the Anabaptist people, education was extremely important, that all their boys and girls learned to read. And so they had their own schools. Then in the early 1800s, the state mandated education. And they came to those little schools at the crossroads, and they said, look, we'll help to pay some expenses here, and you can still have your own schools, but we'll help to pay some expenses, and we have a curriculum that we are insisting that be taught. Well, okay. We still have our own teachers. We still have our own school board. And so all those little one-room schools were community schools. The parents had control over those schools. They were right in the area where they could see what was happening. They made the decisions, and it was a community experience. Then the schools got consolidated. Now we have school boards that are remotely accessible. You might know who they are, but they're not necessarily your own people. They don't necessarily hold your values. And the children are trucked off to these consolidated schools. You know, it took a long time for people to wake up. I lived at the time and was part of the group of people that was trying to wake everybody up. And that was hard. It was hard work because we'd gotten used to that. And my father, I owe it to my father. My father, from the time his first child was born, was determined to have his children have a Christian education. And the whole time we were there in the church where we were, he was campaigning to get a Christian day school started. It never happened. And one of the reasons why my parents moved their membership from there to Washington County, there were a number of reasons, but a main reason was because that was the only way my father could think of to put his children in a Christian school. My dad was famous for saying, the public schools are essentially pagan. Now see, he was thinking, he was allowing himself to really absorb what was going on. He was concerned about what he saw. And we got our Christian day school started, and just in time. I hate to think of what would have happened to our children if we had not yanked them out of the public school when we did. That's an example. Be circumspect. Take music. The CCM, cheap music, sort of caught our people blindsided. And it happened very slowly. You have the gospel song with a little bit more repetition, a little more emphasis on the rhythm, and that's the first step down that road. And Lowell Mason saw it, and he said, if the church is going to go down this road, church music will be corrupted. If he were living today, he'd say, I told you so. And then when we changed, this is amazing to me. When the church and Sunday school hymnal came out, that was the first English hymnal. Now, there was an English hymnal published by John Funk, but it had the words and the tunes at the top. It never went over very big. But the songbook that really changed us from German to English and four-part singing was the church and Sunday school hymnal. I don't know what people were thinking, but we made one great big leap, not just from German to English, and not just to having music in our books. We made a huge leap from good, pious, pietistic German songs sung with German chorales, good, solid music, to cheap, junky gospel songs written to musical jingles. That all happened with just in that one change from our old German hymnals to the church and Sunday school hymnal. And I'm wondering, who in the world, was anybody thinking? Well, John Brunk was the editor of that book, one of the main editor, and he did do some thinking. Between 1902 and 1926, when he was working on the church hymnal, he decided that the gospel song was not something that the church should be deeply involved with. So he compiled a hymnal with no gospel songs in it, and the Herald Press said, well, look, they're already singing these gospel songs. If we publish this hymnal, nobody will use it. So they said it had to have 20% gospel songs, and that's what the church hymnal has, and that's what my hymnal has. I think that served us well. But he saw what was happening. But just think about it. Those songs did not have our theology. They were Save Me gospel songs. It was all about getting saved and going to heaven, how wonderful heaven's going to be. That's part of the gospel. We should sing some of those songs. But those songs, now later on, there were some songs written in that genre with these themes I'm going to tell you, but basically gospel songs as they originally were sung and as they still sort of predominate, don't have themes of cross-bearing, discipleship, obedience, non-resistance, non-conform. It doesn't have almost any of that theology. And so we had a whole generation, in fact, a whole century of people singing gospel songs. And then on top of that, we had revivalistic preaching, which was all about you need to get saved if you want to go to heaven. Well, who's going to argue with that? But that was the main motivation in the songs and the preaching. So is it any wonder that the church finally was struggling with individualism? This was all about me. It was all about me getting to heaven when I died. Very little emphasis on the church, very little emphasis on the things that we believe beyond that. It weakened a loyalty to the church. And I think it left us with an insistence on individualistic lifestyle decisions instead of common cultural practices. I think that's part of that's part of it. There's more to it than that. I think if we're not careful, we're in danger of losing our sense of identity as a people of God with distinctive beliefs and values. And I say that kindly, but I really believe that's where we are. And I think it's time for some people to be circumspect and look at history. You've seen me do this many times. If you're only going to look at your own experience and the present, you can go anywhere there. But if you get a good knowledge of church history, you can chart with some certainty into the future. And church history has an awful lot to say about this subject, about common cultural practices. The wise account for all the facts. They sniff out the nuances. Somebody said the devil's in the details. The little foxes spoil the vine. And unless people are circumspect, they go down the road we went with the school. They go down the road people go with music. They go down the road we go with culture. It takes some really astute, and we're going to get to that later in the outline, people who are looking all around. They're looking at history. They're looking at what's happening. And they're saying, wait a minute here. This is not a good direction. We need to get our singing back to good, solid hymns. We need to get our children in our own schools like we had at the beginning. It takes people who see those things and make a strong stand, or at least articulate clearly. Someone has said, a circumspect person sees the end in the trend. By contrast, we have someone who says, fools rush in where angels fear to tread. They want immediate gratification. They want immediate whatever. And I think the Save Me gospel gave that. You give an altar call, people come down, they have a big emotional experience, and immediately, believe, obey, the work is done, be saved tonight. That's not in my hymnal. That's where the work begins. It doesn't all get done that night. But see, we sang that kind of stuff. That's the kind of stuff that got sung. Immediate gratification, immediate response, immediate everything. So we need people who are alert. All right? 16 says, redeeming the time because the days are evil. Well, it's time to be active. Time is short, and the days are evil. The idea of redeeming is buying back or winning back. I like to think of it, of course, once time is gone, you can't get it back. And so that's a little bit of a difficulty comprehending what that's actually saying. I have the idea of capturing it. Don't let it fly. Don't let it go. Capture it. Say, this is the moment. This is the hour. And use that time and capture it for something worthwhile. Make it serve your purpose. Don't let it slip uselessly away. I never heard anybody say, I spent too much time with my family at the end of their life. I never heard anybody say, I got too much education. I never heard anybody say, I read too many good books. I never heard anybody say, I memorized too much scripture. I never heard anybody say, I wasted my time learning to sing. I never heard anybody say, I gave too much of my money to help others. I never heard anybody say, I went to church too much. I never heard anybody say, I wasted my time in voluntary service. Our freedoms as believers are slipping away. What will we say we wish we had done? We're losing our freedoms. I don't know how quickly it will progress to where I think it'll finally be. But there will be a day that some people will be saying, we don't have any Bibles. I wish I had memorized more scripture. We don't have any songbooks. I wish I had memorized more songs. I hope we don't say that. I hope we don't say that. We are to be salt and light. We are put here to be an influence. We are put here to be an influence. Maltby D. Babcock says it this way. We are not here to play, to dream, to drift. We have hard work to do and loads to lift. Shun not the struggle, face it, 'tis God's gift. Say not the days are evil. Who's to blame? and fold the hands and acquiesce? Oh, shame. Stand up, speak out, and bravely in God's name. Be strong. It matters not how deep entrenched the wrong, how hard the battle goes, the day, how long. Faint not, fight on. Tomorrow comes the song. Or to borrow another piece from literature, when I was working on this, the floods of literature just coming to my mind, so you're just going to have to bear with me. In another one of Shakespeare's works, he says this. Now picture somebody building a boat on the beach, a big boat that he can only get into the water if he just pushes it at the right time when the tide is at the right place. Picture that. This is what he says. There is a tide in the affairs of men, which taken at the flood leads on to fortune. Omitted, all of life is bound in miseries and in shallows. You'll stay right there. On such a sea, we are now afloat, and we must take the current when it serves, or lose our ventures. I'm trying to help you see this morning that, like our Bishop Amos Martin used to say, I only remember one thing quotable from him, and he said it frequently, life is serious. Time, he didn't say this, but time is limited. It is limited. You're going to get to my age someday and you're going to say, what did I accomplish of worth? What did I accomplish now that I wish that everybody should accomplish? The time is now. You need to capture the time and make it serve a kingdom purpose. And finally, it's time to be astute. To be astute is to have an acute mental vision and observance. God has a plan and a perspective. Make it your purpose to learn it in as much detail as possible. And follow the blueprint and model the new humanity. Romans chapter 12, verse 2 says, proving. What we're here to do is to prove, I think, to ourselves and to everyone looking on. What is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God? And just a couple of verses later, he talks about what you will see. He says, be careful not to think of yourself more highly than you ought to think. Our whole problem is self. All those self-words, self-gratification, whatever, I don't have them listed. We need to live life so that it's as good in retrospect as it was in prospect. See, the world it's exactly the opposite with the world. They have this prospect, oh, it's going to be great. And then they look back and it's a rotten retrospect. The Christian lives so that the retrospect, I would say, is even better than the prospect, because often the prospect looks a little bit difficult and a little bit challenging. But oh, the retrospect. Oh, the retrospect. Keep Jesus in the center. Be a fruit-bearing Christian. Don't just be a productive Christian. A productive Christian just gets things done. A fruit-bearing Christian is about what you are becoming. And so, keep your focus on Jesus and make it your purpose in life to do the things that really count. And if you find yourself in the center of God's will, and this is the goal, with everything you say and everything you do, remember that reservoir of grace I talk about? God's just waiting to pour that into the person who purposefully evaluates the time, evaluates the situation, and makes his mark at the right place at the right time. And he wants to see that succeed. And so he will pour his grace into that. I don't know how people expect to experience grace when they're doing things God doesn't want to have accomplished. He's not going to give any grace for people to do things he doesn't want to have done, for words he doesn't want to have said. There'll be no grace there at all. But if we can be astute, and we can understand where God wants this said and where God wants this done, and we can be totally cooperative with what he wants to accomplish, then we will be filled with grace. The hymnist Frances Ridley Havergal took New Year's Day very seriously, and she always spent time reflecting, and every year she would compose a poem and send it to all her friends about what she thought. in terms of the new year. The one she wrote in 1874 has become immortal. She was 36 years old at the time, and she dashed this poem off in short order and had it printed on specially designed greeting paper and sent it to all her friends. She had no idea that it would become a classic. She captioned it, "A Happy New Year, ever such may it be." And here's the poem. Another year is dawning. Dear Father, let it be. In working or in waiting, another year with thee. Another year of progress, another year of praise, another year of proving thy presence all the days. Now, we sang that this morning, or I would have us close with that. We'll let the song leader think of something else. So during this new year, may you have enough happiness to keep you sweet, enough trials to keep you strong, enough sorrow to keep you human, enough hope to keep you happy, enough failure to keep you humble, enough success to keep you eager, enough friends to give you comfort, enough wealth to meet your needs, enough enthusiasm to make you look forward to tomorrow, and enough determination to make each day better than the day before. Lord, please help us use the 8,760 hours this year in the wisest way we possibly can for your glory. The time is now. Act in the living present. Tomorrow will be too late. Another poem by Thomas Carlyle. So here hath been dawning another blue day. Think, wilt thou let it slip useless away? Out of eternity this new day is born, and into eternity at night will return. Behold it aforetime, no eye ever did. So soon it forever from all eyes is hid. Here hath been dawning another blue day. Think, wilt thou let it slip useless away? Does anybody have any comment? Let's be awake, let's be alert, let's be active, and let's be astute to know the will of the Lord.